background. I spent the last 10 plus years working in asset management, hedge fund, and prior to that I was working for like large professional service companies like PwC, right? And so I think that one of the reasons why Stacey asked me to come in was, can everybody hear me okay? Yeah, because I've got a bit of a quiet voice. Sorry?
There are a lot of noise and I have problems to hear you.
Oh, okay. Do you want to come a little bit to the front? Do you want to? Come on through, guys. There's Autumn with the beers.
I know. A couple hours for coffee.
All right, all right.
Almost there.
Yeah, so I was just saying, when Stacey asked me to join, I think one of the main objectives was very much to be like, look, you've got this traditional mindset of controls, governance, oversight, and trying to bring some order to, you know, what was quite a loose way of running finance at the foundation. So there was definitely a lot of things to be done when I joined. There's still a lot going on. And then what also transpired was, you know, some of these kind of TradFi concepts should also be adopted by our projects, right? And the main reason for that is if you have a better handle over your finances and a better handle of receiving information in a timely way, then you have a greater chance of being successful, right? And whilst projects are quite young and simple in nature, being able to structure it in the right way will allow you to scale quickly. And when you get into a mode of, for example, needing to do something like a statutory audit, you already have the systems and the processes and the controls needed in order to prevent that from being a hindrance, but actually being a value add for you as an organization. Because then when you go and do, for example, a raise, these are sort of the things that the VC on the other side will be looking for. Yeah. So what I decided to do in this session was just cover off some of the very basic, simple finance principles and the way you should structure, I think, a finance function. So these are some of the principles that I've adopted since I've come into the organization, and I'll try to speak to some of the changes that I've brought about since I've joined the organization as well. I did ask the crew if we can make this interactive. So look, if you have questions, ask, right? Or if you want to grab me at the end, please do so. Because given this was my first role, I had to spend quite a lot of time with potential service providers, because actually we were in quite a dire situation where we were either the service provider was not fit for purpose or they were just charging us too much. So we ended up doing a lot of beauty parades as to who we should engage with going forward. So what I would say is that if you are in a position whereby you want to change your tax advisors, or you want to change what accounting system you should be using, or which custodian you should be going with, or banking provider, we have Signum at the back there. So, ask the question. We're here to help. You know, I release a transparency report on a quarterly basis. There is a designated email address called askthecfo@algren.foundation. John's used it. We've had really good, productive conversations. And I would say productive, constructive conversations, because that's exactly what they were. And so feel free to use that as well. Yeah? Okay. So, you know, I asked this broad question, how should the finance team be helping the business, right? And that's regardless of whether your finance function is in-house, right? Because you feel like that is the right thing for you to do, or depending on the nature of your project or your company, or you outsource it to third party. You know, you don't want to see it as a back or middle office. And unfortunately in traditional finance, that's how it's a lot of the time seen. But what's actually transpired in this industry is actually the finance function is critical, super, super important. Why? Because every touch point within an organization has two main touch points. One is legal, one is finance. So we act as almost like an exchange of information and actually have the ability to foresee things that may arise before they actually arise, because we have that information at hand and we can connect the dots, basically. So if you're not utilizing your finance function today, hopefully there's going to be two key takeaways hopefully you're going to have from this session. Number one, you're going to have a greater appreciation that you do want to be using your finance function more. And two, there might be some concepts that I'm going to go through that you think, actually, you know what, I'm going to go away and I'm going to speak to my service provider who runs my finance function. I'm going to go back to my finance function and I'm going to ask them to adopt that control or that feature, or carry out some sort of beauty parade stroke review of a particular area of your finance function. Yeah. And what I've done is I've broken down the presentation into 3 areas. I've got financial operations, I've got treasury management, and then I've got best practices. Because, you know, when I was, you know, much more vanilla in this industry, or in finance, shall I say, it wasn't very clear as to what should I be doing on a weekly basis, monthly basis, quarterly, annually, and how should I be structuring these type of deliverables. So hopefully, you know, there'll be a bit of a checklist that you can take away and you can think about going forward. So the first section is finance operations. Like I said, make it interactive. So if you have questions, shout. No issues, and we can pause and we can deep dive on a particular session if it's needed, right? So the first one is on finance operations, and I've broken that down into 3. So you've got performance management, reporting, and then tax and compliance. Yeah. So on performance management, I'll just run you through each of these bullet points. So the first is accounts production. So this is basically, you know, the production of your accounts, which is effectively your bookkeeping. Now, when I joined the foundation, the bookkeeping was not in a particularly good state. They were incomplete, right? And a lot of the accounting treatment of, especially around the digital asset payments, was being done incorrectly, because it's actually quite complicated when you've got your tokens already minted around the concept of off balance sheet and on balance sheet, but I won't go into that today unless obviously there are questions around it, where there was basically omissions. And so, you know, this is your single source of truth. So you should be spending a reasonable amount of time in making sure that the quality is there, because everything else that is talked about in this session feeds off that effectively. Yeah. And one of the main changes I brought about when I joined was I went from having a quarterly set of bookkeeping taking place by the team to monthly, to now we do a weekly production. And that's really what's allowed us to produce the transparency report. And I'll touch base on that for a minute very quickly, because there was 2 key elements to a transparency report. Firstly is that we have to maintain dual books, because in traditional sets of books and records, everything's on an accruals basis, because that's how international accounting standards are. But for the transparency report, it's cash basis, right? What's basically your position at the start of the period, and then what's at the end of the period, and what's effectively moved. So what I've actually done, and I'll talk about it briefly in a moment again, is that we've changed our accounting system, which actually housed a dual set of books. So taking away the pressure from the team and making it a lot more semi-automated. And the second change that we introduced was the frequency, right? So not only was the format very different, it was more essay-based, more theoretical. We went to making it feel like more like an interim report that you would typically see in a listed organization. But that was even then in what was considered to be quite a simple format, from a semi-annual set of, you know, reports to a quarterly basis. And I'm hoping that, you know, yourselves and others within the ecosystem appreciate receiving that information on a lot more timely basis. Yeah, so really important. The second is financial modeling. So this is actually something that we spend a lot of time doing. So if you think about, you know, you got Stacey, who's our CEO, who comes out with a strategic vision, right? What is her strategic objectives that she wants to achieve for 2024? She actually went through that as part of her keynote speech on day 1, right? And she also force ranked it, which was super important for us. I was then able to take those strategic objectives and line up what are the financial commitments that are needed on the back of being able to achieve those strategic objectives, and how are we going to do it? Why is that important? Because it makes us more financially savvy, but it also puts the pressure on the individual that's going to be delivering, right? So you take the strategic objective, you apply the way you're going to achieve it financially, and then you make somebody accountable for it. And then we review that on a monthly basis, but we do a more hardline review on a semi-annual basis, and that's something that one should be doing on a regular basis as well. Yeah. Next is budget setting. So once you've got your financial modeling in place, you've documented it, you've taken into consideration of the variables that you're taking into consideration. You want to track those variables, because when you come and review your financial model, you want to work out how far off the mark were you on those variables that were set, and whether they need to be rebalanced, reset, or whether a new variable in its entirety should be taken into consideration. Yeah. And then on the back of that, we will have a budget being set, and that's where there's my boss watching me, and that's effectively where you are making the individual accountable. right? Because once you've set your financial model and you've got your budget, then I'm going to say, right, Eric, you're head of business development. This is what you're going after. This is how much money you want to spend. You're now accountable for it. Mark, our CMO, this is what you want to do with digital marketing. This is how you want to change the website, right? This is what you want to do from advertisements perspective. This is the cash that you've been allocated. These are the KPIs that you're trying to achieve on the back of it. This is the amount of money you're going to be spending. Don't get me wrong. He's then not got free will to go and spend that money. There is a whole oversight, governance, authorized signatory list process in place to ensure that even when he wants to spend that money against his budget, there is enough levels of review taking place to ensure that that money is being spent well and he's not going rogue. Yeah? Reviewing contracts. So before I even introduced any change, the first thing I did when I joined the foundation is I took every single, it was actually not just me, it was myself and Deirdre, who was then our COO, we took every single contract that was active at the foundation and we reviewed it. Because a lot of the contracts that we had, unfortunately, at the foundation were commercially unviable, right? It probably was set at a time when the token price was different to where it is today. There was aggressive clauses in place. There was very high floor prices, and it just meant that we had to spend between 2 to 3 months renegotiating all our contracts. So what we now have is a register of all our contracts, right? So we know when something's coming to an end, when we need to renegotiate something, and it's very clear and simple as to what is our upcoming commitments, and that's something that you should be looking to put in place as well. Yeah. And then that kind of leads on to the financial tracking of your commitments. Next is reporting. So on the back of your bookkeeping of your management accounts, that should be done like I said, we used to do it quarterly, and now it's being done on a monthly basis, but albeit the bookkeeping is taking place on a weekly basis. The two main reports that you should be having on a monthly basis or on a quarterly basis is your P&L, so your profit and loss statement, and then you should be having a balance sheet being produced, which shows you what is your exposure from an asset and from a liability perspective. Yeah, all pretty basic stuff. On the back of your management accounts, you want to be producing reconciliations. Two assertions that are basically trying to be met via reconciliations is one is the accuracy and the other is the completeness. Without it, you have no idea whether your books and records are complete or not. Yeah, very simple. Budget tracking. So yes, your budget is being set at the start of the year, but you've got budget versus actual. Super, super important. And then we actually have a third line, which at the moment, unfortunately, is being maintained on a manual basis because there isn't a system out there that allows me to do it on an automatic basis, is if I've got, Mark wants to spend 100,000, for example, on advertisements. He's already spent 50,000 today, but he's committed to spending another 20. That commitment line is super, super important because what I don't want to do is just be on an actuals basis of what he has spent, but I want to know what he has ring-fenced so he doesn't overspend at a future point in time. Yeah, really important there as well. So we were in an environment where actually I was producing budget versus actuals on a monthly basis, downloading it from our accounting system, uploading it in an Excel format. But we've actually changed our accounting system so that actually budget versus actual is live. So every time I do a posting, it updates the actual. Every single budget owner can go into our accounting system and actually see how much they have spent live. 24 hours a day being updated every time a new invoice is being posted. The bit that isn't incorporated there is the commitments piece because the system doesn't allow it at the moment. Okay. Cost control. So one thing I have introduced is a theme called cost consciousness. Everybody needs to be cost conscious because yes, I'm at the forefront of negotiating most contracts. Most contracts are signed off by myself at a certain level and then it goes up to Stacey and then up to the board. But the initial negotiations have to take place by the budget owner, and it's very important that they have that cost-conscious environment at the back of their mind. So a lot of time has been taken in changing mindsets, right? And that is super, super important. So while you're still young, you're nimble, you're flexible, try to incorporate these best practices early because actually what transpires is undoing some of those habits becomes quite difficult. Right? And it's taken quite some time, me coming in from a position where we were to a position where we are now, undoing a lot of that environment. Make sense? Yeah. And then tax and compliance. So jurisdictional reporting. We are multi-jurisdictional at the foundation, right? We have HQ somewhere, and then we have a load of subsidiaries sitting beneath that based on where people are employed or where services are being obtained. The main takeaway from this slide is be compliant. right? Because the problem that you've got, and this is coming from a TradFi mindset, is that once you've got a black mark in one jurisdiction, it's very difficult for that black mark to be taken away. Once that black tick has been applied to your organization, you're going to get the surveys, right, on an annual basis or on a semi-annual basis. You're going to get it, and they're not going to go away. And what people don't also realize is that jurisdictions talk to one another. So let's say, for example, you missed a filing or your tax estimate because you weren't maintaining proper books and records, or they weren't timely, was incorrect, whereby you received a penalty or a fine. That Singapore tax jurisdiction is going to talk to Ireland, is going to talk to the US, and therefore it's a bit of a downward spiral effect. And so again, while you're young and you're nimble and you're simple, incorporate these best practices to ensure that you are compliant. Now, there's two ways you can go with this. You can either bring a tax expert in, or you can outsource it. And what you'll find that more often than not, the right answer is to outsource it, right? Because it's very difficult and challenging to stay on top of all the different tax regimes, which are continuously changing as governments change, as budgets change. And if you're multi-jurisdictional, it's very difficult to incur the expense of bringing that expertise in-house, and it's quite it's quite cost efficient to outsource it to a third party. And if you need a list or a short list of potential service providers where you've got one touch point which is multi-jurisdictional, reach out, and we have a short list of potential providers that you could potentially use as well, because that's what we do at the foundation. So when I give this type of thinking, it's not like theoretical. This is what we're actually doing at the foundation. I think it's a nice way of being able to articulate these principles by saying this is what we're actually doing at the foundation. So tax returns and avoided inquiries, which kind of leans on the point I was making. We have statutory audits. Yes, we don't disclose the statutory financials, but we do have statutory audits. We actually have more than one. We have a Singapore statutory audit, and we have Hong Kong statutory audits. And they are a nightmare, because they really scrutinize your books. I'm an ex-auditor myself, so I kind of know where they're coming from and what they're trying to achieve on the back of it, but it is super painful. The main reason why it's painful is because in our industry, not in our industry, the way the auditors work is basically they set a materiality threshold, right? So they're going to say anything above this amount, we're going to test, we're going to check, we're going to look, we're going to validate to ensure that it's accurate or it's in line with what it should be doing, and there isn't any fraudulent activity being carried out. The problem that you've got with our industry is that they take the traditional calculation and they apply a huge haircut, which means the number that they're looking at is much lower, which means they're looking at a lot more transactions, right? Then there becomes this trade-off between, shall I go with a top-tier audit firm, like the PwCs, the Deloittes, the Ernst & Youngs, or shall I go with an audit firm which is a bit more involved in our industry? And that's a crossroad that I faced when I joined the organisation. I'm ex-PricewaterhouseCoopers. I've had audit firms which are EY, KPMG, and they work if you need that brand. But the problem that you've got with top tier, I'm not bad-mouthing top tier, I'm just saying where we are as an industry today is that they get more value from the audit than we get from them. Yeah? So, and what I mean by that is they charge an absolute premium because the risk profile is attached to the audit, and they're learning on the job, right? Because they don't have the systems and the processes and the mindset to be able to audit our numbers efficiently. Now, don't get me wrong, if you're a regulated top tier bank, for example, and it makes sense to have an EY, KPMG, PwC, sure. But even for an organization like us, it does not make sense. What was more valuable to me was actually on board a audit firm that actually has the expertise and is able to benchmark the way I do things versus the way other organizations do things. So I'm actually learning from them as well as them learning from me, and it's at a competitive price. So that's the route that we've decided to go down today. So you need to think about that, right? And again, if we can help in going down that decision tree and helping make such decisions, reach out, and again, we can have a conversation about it. And then finally is counterparty due diligence, right? Again, something I did all the way from tax advisors, custodians, auditors, banking partners. We did deep dive due diligence across the board, very lengthy process. It's not just focused around fees and costs, but it's also focused around, is it fit for purpose? And I'm a big fan of building relationships. I'm not a huge fan of having 20, 25 different counterparties, because then managing those relationships is quite challenging. But having a handful of counterparties that you can lean on and you can grow with, I think, is more important. And you actually build up an interpersonal relationship with that counterparty. And again, we have Signum in the room, which is one of our banking providers, one of 3, right? And when I asked, do you want to come out? And they said yes, because they want to understand about our ecosystem. They've got a VC arm, so they're thinking about investing in projects. And again, we're growing together as a result on the back of it. Yeah. So I just want to quickly touch base on operating model, right? And what I call an operating model is, what are the systems and service providers that you are using within your finance function to make your life easier? You have 2 different types of finance leads. You have one who says, look, I've got a 15-man team, right? And because they're trying to show off the fact that they've got, a really complicated, big finance team, lots going on, we're really, really busy. I'm actually quite the opposite in mindset. I actually like to say that I've got a 3 or a 4-man team, because a lot of the hard work is being done by our systems and the way we've structured our finance function, right? And so, just out of interest, I do have 4 people dispersed in across Europe, all relatively junior, but come from the industry, right? And I've recently, as I mentioned earlier, changed our accounting system from one to another, and I now use Sage Intacct. And we have structured Sage Intacct. I'm going a little bit off script here, but we've structured Sage Intacct in a way whereby I do not need to use a crypto subledger. So I have got fiat and I've got algo tokens as my treasury. And the first thing I did is, right, I'm going to use my old accounting system and I'm going to bring in a subledger that does all my crypto recognition and does the upload into the existing accounting system. I realized I was putting a plaster on the problem. So we decided to do a beauty parade. We found who was to go with. We went with Sage Intacct, and we've been able to, for the first time, for them as well, been able to change and manipulate their accounting system, which did 2 things for us. Number 1, we treated our wallets like bank accounts. And number 2, we were able to maintain dual sets of books and records. So my transparency report now comes out of the Sage system rather than having to maintain it on Excel. So yes, we produce our transparency report by T+1 following quarter end, so by the following month end. But actually the numbers are produced within 5 business days because we've been able to make that change in the system, which is quite impressive. So I think the point I'm trying to make here is try to make your life easy, right? If you do have your finance function in-house, really think about how you are going to structure your finance function. A few other things that we've done within our team is we use Expensify, for example, for personal expenses. We've got an API feed going into the accounting system. We have between 50 and 55 active wallets. We've got API feed directly from the blockchain going into Sage that's automatically performing my bank stroke wallet reconciliations. Before that's being done on Excel manually by an individual. So look, if we could do, I could probably talk about this for an hour in itself, but there's just some examples to, I suppose, give you a flavor of the sort of things that you could do to try to make your finance function a lot more efficient and without having to incur the expense of growing the headcount unnecessarily. Yeah. Moving on to treasury management, which I've broken down between counterparty management, deployment, and cash burn and runway. Yeah. So I think the biggest message here is obviously diversification, right? Super important. We all know the issues that we had with the bank runs last year, which was it last year or year before, which was a real nice introduction to me in the world of blockchain and navigating that. And the only way we were able to survive is because we already had a number of banking platforms that allowed us to basically diversify away, right? So diversification is super, super important, and doing the relevant due diligence, building those relationships. What I feel organizations fail to do is the ongoing due diligence that is required, right? So, you have the initial due diligence, right, of, yep, they're right fit for purpose, the price point is good, the technology is good. We've had our CTO go in and check to make sure that it's sound from a technological security perspective. But what about that ongoing due diligence, right? And that is really, really important. So try to do that. Normally say a tag team between compliance and finance, but it's a heavier lift by finance. So where possible, try to maintain a register of your key counterparties and have a little clock whereby, every 6 months or on an annual basis, you're going to be picking up that phone or paying a visit or asking them to come to you, and you're going to be doing a bit of a deep dive due diligence to make sure that there's still sound counterparties. Because it's a bit like when you think to yourself, you buy a house and you don't put your alarm system in. And you think, I'm going to put an alarm system into the house, right? Until you get burgled, and you think, oh shoot, I should have put an alarm system in. It's exactly the same concept. You're thinking, I'm going to do that due diligence, but it's not that important. It's actually very important within a finance function, so do make sure you do that. Industry assessment, and then keeping commercials flexible, because you don't know when there is something which is better on the other side. The best term that you can do, and we have standard language now, is termination within 30 days. Yeah. So where we can, I probably shouldn't say this because I've got Signum here, but where we can, we have a copy and paste sentence which says we will want to be able to terminate within 30 days. Because we want to have the upper hand of being able to have that flexibility for whatever the reason may be. Yeah. So you want to. It's actually a really good point. And we work closely with Saj, who's our general counsel. We have these 3-4 different finance-related languages that go into all our standard contracts, which is how are you going to convert fiat into algos, making sure it's on our terms. How are you going to be able to terminate from the contract? Because these are all the things that will get you out of sticky positions. Yeah. Deployment. I think the biggest takeaway here is making sure you have sufficient controls the way you deploy. And I think there are 2 key messages coming out on the back of this. Number 1 is do it in stages, right? So we've actually invested in a money market fund because we want to put our fiat to use, and we've done it via Signum, and that will come out in the transparency report, so a bit of insider information there. But we've done it in stages, right? We put a relatively large ticket because there's a good yield that's being earned on the back of it because the underlying is T-bills, so it's relatively sound. But we did it in tranches. So do it in tranches, get comfortable, feel it, make sure that the paperwork is there, make sure the calculation is there, make sure it's visible on the platform before you decide to deploy heavy. And then the second takeaway is make a checker, prepare a reviewer, super important. What should give you comfort, even though I am the position that I'm in at the foundation, I cannot prepare and release payments myself. The system has not been set up in that way that I can do that from any platform, fiat or crypto. My team have to prepare because they're acting in a governance role to make sure Harpal's not acting as a bad actor or he's not going rogue. And then I go in and review and approve. And that should give everybody in the ecosystem comfort, the fact that I'm not misplacing funds as well. Yeah, because there is a team there who has to prepare it. And I would advise you to do something similar. All right. And then finally is tracking exposure. So I'm going to mention it in a minute, but I'll do it now, which is that on a weekly basis, I have something called a Treasury report produced. And that Treasury report is breaking down my deployment in fiat and in algo based on counterparty exposure. So I want to know where is my money sitting? Second, how liquid is it? Is it readily available? Because I've put it into money market fund where I can extract it on a T+1 basis. Is it sitting as cash reserve? Or is it in some sort of DeFi liquidity pool, which means I've got to take it out in small tranches without causing pain on the DeFi platform themselves? So I would advise having something like a Treasury report. I have mine produced on a weekly basis, which allows you to track and maintain and have a basically 1-page PDF picture of where does your Treasury sit and what does it look like. Treasury dashboard, monitoring metrics. So one of the things that we do in terms of deployment, and again, it's in the transparency report, we make investments, right? So we want to know where those investments have gone. We give loans, and those loans are done commercially. When do those loans expire? Is there a conversion rate? I want to be tracking that as part of the Treasury report. What is my cash reserves? So there will be a minimum amount of cash that we are holding that we do absolutely nothing with, right? Because it's super important that we do have that case. And there is some methodology behind why that number is the way it is, because Unfortunately, in case the situation was sour, we need to have a certain amount of cash in order to be able to cover ourselves for a defined period of time. Unfortunately, you can take comfort in the fact that those calculations are being done and cash is being reserved for those sort of situations. And then finally, which is something that I find that a lot of people don't do, is covering off your unrecorded liabilities. So unrecorded liability is a liability, but it's not being recognized on your balance sheet because the condition has not been met. So if there is a trigger event whereby something sour was to happen, you are liable then to pay out. So we have a register where we track our unrecorded liabilities, and we are continuously assessing through our risk committee the probability of that liability arising and how that impacts our cash reserve on the back of it. Yeah. And again, something that can be introduced depending on the size and complexity of your organization. And then the final section is best practices, right? And I think there's a few obvious ones here. Listen to the needs of your business, right? It very much falls back again onto the strategic objectives that are set by the CEO, but the CEO is going around and working out what is the house view? What does everybody want to do? Why do we want to do it? What's our North Star? How do we get there? We have strategic objectives that are 1 to 3 years, and we have a strategic objectives, what's going on for the next 12 months. So do listen to the organization. It was quite difficult for me because I was coming from an organization which is highly profitable to an organization where we're not necessarily revenue generating. And the cash reserves is continuously moving based on the algo price, right? So it required a different mindset, and it took me a little while to get there. That's the first point. The second point is that I wanted to introduce the controls, the governance, and the oversight, but I didn't want to hinder the growth. Right? So I had to very quickly recognize what strategies are going to be effective and what those that are not going to be effective, and where they're not, provide hard challenge, because you want people to be able to give you the assurance that they are the right route to go down before we do go down that route. So listen to the business. Stakeholder management, right? That's both internal and external. So internally, we have a number of meetings that take place in order to sync up what's going on in the organization or creating a new house view on a particular topic. External stakeholders, hence the transparency report, plus other correspondence that we have going out within the organization. Yeah, cost conscious, as I've mentioned. I think just continuously being cost conscious, continuously asking yourself, is this a necessity? And if it's a luxury, make everybody aware that it's a luxury, and make sure that they recognize and they acknowledge that this is an ordinary practice. We're doing this because of ABC reasons, and it's not necessarily best practice, but we're doing it for the following reasons. Yeah. Suitable governance, so you've got the maker checker, the preparer and the reviewer, but there's also a number of committees. And again, you're probably thinking, well, the people that I'm going to ask to join the committee are the people that are sitting on the left and the right of me, right? Because I felt that when I joined the organisation. But what you realise that when you label a committee, and we have two prominent one's called Audit and Treasury Committee, and the second is called the Risk Committee that I already referenced already. When you're going into those meetings, even with the same person on the left and the right of you, but it's got that label, you think differently. You're forced to think about risk. You're forced to put a risk register together and rank it and work out, if that scenario was to arise, what are you going to do? Audit and Treasury, same thing. When you're going into that meeting, you're saying, look, I'm going to deploy that DFly, or I'm going to make this money market investment. You're going in with a different mindset of saying, why are you doing that? Isn't that too much exposure? Can we do that somebody else? We're going to put a little bit more into folks finance, but can't we do that with Tiny Man? Why are we not doing it with Tiny Man? So you ask yourselves different type of questions when you're specifically setting meetings up, discussing those topics, rather than doing it casually on the left and the right of you when you're in an open office plan. Yeah, something I would definitely encourage. And then finally is timely reporting. Timely reporting will allow you to make better decisions. It will keep you out of trouble, and it will allow you to grow. Yeah. Better decisions because you know what your financial position is. It will keep you out of trouble because things like tax reporting, compliance reporting, you'll be able to do it a lot simpler, a lot easier. You're not going to get that black mark. And then finally, it's going to allow you to grow, because when you do have a potential investor knocking on your door, you've got the pieces of information ready on hand, giving them confidence that your finances are in order, which already is a bit of a barrier when it comes to raising money. Yeah. And these are like some best practices which I think you should consider doing, monthly, annually, and ongoing Monthly bookkeeping, we do ours weekly. Management accounts, we do ours monthly. Budget tracking, we do ours monthly. Treasury reporting, mine is done on a weekly basis. Annually, set a budget, right? So we start our budget process in Q4 and we finalize it in January via the board, right? So have a formal budget process in place, take it seriously. Cost profile review, so we're continuously, I always have 2-3 cost initiatives. So, last month it might have been about our custodians, next month it's about whether we want to still keep Signum or not. Oh, sorry. Right? But, I continuously have 1 or 2 projects going on. You would have read about some of those already in the transparency report. We completely renegotiated our relationships with our relay node and participation node providers. You would have read about that. We internalized the random beacon because we were getting charged extortionate amounts through a third party. We were able to do it for 5% of the cost that we were paying to third parties. So you should always have some cost conscious activities going on because you're chipping away at that cost profile, right? Operating model review, kind of leaning on systems and processes and providers, making sure that you're acting smartly rather than just unnecessarily growing your headcount. And then on an ongoing basis, compliance calendar. So in the same way we have a risk register, you should be having a compliance calendar. We're multi-jurisdictional. So I've probably got some sort of reporting requirement once a month. And what you don't want to do is miss it. So just have a simple compliance calendar with an automated timer, with a buffer of how long it takes you to produce it, how long it takes you to sign it off, and get it out of the door. It means that you're not going to get yourself in any hot water. And then finally, continuously looking to asset safeguard, right? For all the reasons that we mentioned, rug pulls, smart contracts not being fully audited, meaning that there is a potential weakness in the technological setup, and making sure that you're well diversified from a banking perspective. Yeah. And that's it. You're done.